be explicit and clear about what you want to achieve, and let people help you. Like, if you don't tell anyone, they won't, or they won't know that they could. Like, people are really, it's such a good community. People are desperate to just be kind and help. So give them the opportunity to, by just being open and honest and trying to help. And honestly, you'll go much faster.
All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to the AI Stories podcast. I'm Leiser, I'm a data scientist at Iwoka, and I will be your host. So today, our guest is Adam Sroka. Adam first studied chemistry and then did a PhD in physics where he modeled lasers. He then had a bunch of experiences, but at some point he moved to Incremental Group, where he started as a senior data scientist, but then made the transition to becoming a manager. After that, he moved to Origami, where he became the head of machine learning engineering. But a couple of months ago, he actually left to found his own startup, Hypercube Consulting, where he gives advice on data science, machine learning, building data teams, and data strategy. So if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe to my YouTube channel and leave a 5-star review. Let's start the conversation now. Hi Adam, how is it going? How are you today?
Very good, very good. Thank you. Yeah, up here in sunny Edinburgh, although it's still quite cold. How are you?
Yeah, all good. Also quite cold, very dark at the moment, but everything fine. That's life.
Yeah, it's a winter month, winter market time, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we like about Europe, the cold and dark weather. So yeah, first question, just want to know like how did you get into this world of data science, machine learning, AI? How did you get into the field?
Yeah, so I kind of one of these people that always has a plan or had a plan of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. Um, I'm a big believer in having a plan and then not following it. Almost like I had a few jobs after university and kind of enjoyed myself, and then I thought, right, I want to get like a real job, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I spoke to some of my friends who were quants, and they said, well, yeah, look, good money, it's challenging, it's intellectually stimulating, blah blah blah. So I was like, oh, yeah, do that, fine. And to get through the door, you kind of needed to have a PhD, right? So I was like, fine, I'm going to do one, great. And that interested me, and that was all well and good. And then towards the end of that, my doctorate, I started to play around with some machine learning stuff, especially reinforcement learning. So my doctorate was on designing laser defense systems, and yeah, I ended up with a reinforcement learner that could design laser weapons, basically, which sounds a lot more sci-fi than it was. And I really liked that, and I thought it was really good fun. And I kind of realised that I didn't really, at the time, I wasn't that married to any one domain. And then the sexiest job of the 21st century article was out, and like all the hype was growing. This is what, like 2015, right? All the hype was growing, and data science came up as a skill. And at the time, again, you needed to have a PhD to get in. So I thought, brilliant, nice high barrier to entry. Like I'm just about to get into the workforce. It's in line with what I want to do, and that was that. And I loved it. Yeah, I loved just doing numbers on the computer and doing maths at scale and using like big powerful machines to kind of solve problems in weird and wonderful ways. And that was it. And the thing that really got me into it was that you could, without loads of domain knowledge, you could be like a bit useful, because you could, as long as you had the data and a bit of help, like understanding what it meant, you could probably find some insights and stuff that weren't sort of well known before. So yeah, that appealed to me, and the rest is history, I suppose.
When was your first experience with data? Was it during your PhD that you first worked using data?
So yeah, my a lot of my doctorate was based on a ray tracing software for lens design called Zmax, and at the time, it didn't really have any good integrations, and I spent about 3 months trying to decode the binary ray database file into something in MATLAB so that I could read it into MATLAB, and then I thought, once I've got the data in MATLAB, I can do all sorts with it, right? And that was really difficult because the documentation didn't match the reality of what the database was actually encoded into. But eventually, like all good PhDs, you smash your head against the wall until the roof caves in, right? So eventually I cracked it. And that was when I was at the time, right? I'm on a desktop computer and I was using like 6, 7 gigabyte data sets and thinking they were colossal. But it was good fun. And actually, so my consulting firm's called Hypercube because the first algorithm I ever studied, being a physics person that kind of self-taught, was Latin hypercube sampling, which really interested me, and that's kind of why my company's called what it is. So yeah, I guess that was it really. Like first exposure was quite mundane, just trying to crack a proprietary data set so that I could use it in MATLAB to do stuff with. Annoyingly, about 3 months after I finished my PhD, Zemax released a MATLAB connector that did it all for you. So I was ahead of the curve a bit, but not by much.
Okay, so very, very technical. I guess you wanted to move then to something more professional, like more industrial and applied maybe, and move to industry, or why
So
didn't you?
yeah, a bit of a. I kind of say I've got a PhD, but I don't. Right? I have a doctorate, but it's an EngD or an engineering doctorate, and the difference between that, at least over here in the UK, is they have to be industrial placements. They're like a year longer, and you essentially do a master's and then you do a doctorate. But the doctorate is research for a company that you can write up into a thesis and you get your doctorate out of. I just always say PhD because no one knows what an HD is and it's easier.
Mhm.
Um, I've always thought like academia is probably not the place for me. I've always wanted to be hands on, like in a business, like doing stuff. But there was a transition. So I worked for Thales, which is like a French government owned like engineering firm, defense company, and it's huge, like 70,000 employees or something. And yeah, it wasn't for me really. I found that like these projects all had, like the small projects had like 50 people on them and like were like
Mhm.
15 years of development and it was like 7 layers of manager above you and that just the slowness of that just wasn't like we felt like like the researchers doing what I was doing felt like tiny cogs in the very corner of the machine and all that. So I went from Thales to like a 6-person startup in the other end of Glasgow, completely the other end of the spectrum, and yeah, that wasn't all sunshine and rainbows either. But
Do you prefer startups than big companies then in general?
I mean, I think so. I've not worked in a big company for probably 6 or 7 years now. Um, I've just stuck to startups because I quite like, and I think for data scientists, it's quite fun because you can be useful across the board. Like you can be useful to almost any department. And startups, you have to wear many hats, and it's a bit chaotic. And you bring a lot of good skills to a lot of parts of the value chain. If you don't want to just do AI machine learning all day, right? So I like that. That kind of suits me in the way I work, and I've stuck in them ever since. I've consulted into a lot of very big companies and seen a lot of the like reflections of the stuff that I didn't like when I was there. So I can see that I'm probably better in those kind of startup environments. But it's interesting now. Like I'm trying to tackle how do you be the driver of change in those larger organizations? How do I make a big impact? And like a lot of my writings about that, like how do I okay, you're in that environment, like tell us there's 45 people on the project. How do I still get good ideas across and drive value and do interesting stuff?
Yeah, interesting. So do you like startups because you're not just training a model or processing the data, but you kind of have to do different things, right? You need to load the data, make sure the data is easily accessible, load it, train your models, deploy them to production, and kind of do data engineering, data analysts, data scientists, machine learning engineer at the same time. Is that what you like about
Yeah, I do
startups?
like that. I think I like startups because like you often sit a few desks along from the CEO and stuff, and it's like I like the chaos and how quickly things can change and happen, right? But so and I get a lot of flack online for some of the stuff I say about like exactly what you said. You're being as a data scientist, you're often that person that's doing like all the BI and all the data engineering and all the machine learning engineering as well. And that's not just true of startups. That is in fact true of, in my opinion, in my experience, the vast majority of organizations. Like up to a reasonably large scale. So I've got a customer at the moment who's going to do, I think, 1.4 billion in revenue this year, and they had one data scientist that had to do it all, right? So in that environment, like that's why I always say things like, in that environment, you could hire a maths genius like that wants to know stats inside out and wants to do machine learning all day, but they're not going to have the impact because if they need to put stuff into production, and I got chewed up about this the other day about you don't have to put everything in production, but they might land, and I've seen this time and time again, and there's nothing, like there's no support, there's no one to get them data, there's no infrastructure, like, and then just really, really struggle. And I've seen that over and over and over again. And I don't think that's limited to startups. I think actually that's probably a more common story, but I'm happy to be proven wrong.
So for a company which wants to start hiring data scientists or which are hiring their first data scientist, like you mentioned, there could be nothing. Where should the data scientists start? Like, what should they do first to generate value, basically?
So, and yeah, again, caveat all this with like, I'm almost always talking about contexts where you need to put models into a production environment that run all the time. Like I've told that like pharmaceuticals, right, which I've never worked in, that actually you can do loads and loads of one-off analyses and that works. Well, I've never worked there, so take all this with a pinch of salt. But in the environments where it's like putting models like time series forecasting, you want to keep putting them into production, I'd say, right, if you're a data scientist, and it's one of the things that I wrote as a piece recently about like the top questions you can ask. So it's hard to gauge that what level of maturity is an organization at, and you'll often not get the truth either, especially if you're a good candidate and the company wants to sell to you, which I think people forget that happens. Like, people get so caught up about getting the job, they don't realize that actually sometimes the hiring person is also caught up in trying to hire the person. And so sort of like half truths and future truths come out, right? So I think one of the best questions to ask to gauge that is just simply, how many models are in production now, right? And that you'll get a few answers to that, like none tells you, okay, they've not got over that hurdle of deploying their first model. A few, I don't really know. That can be a bit of a red flag. Or, oh, there are lots and lots, but if they don't give you like a good number, you can drill into the question a bit. If someone tells you, oh, we've got such and this many in this department and that, and I don't know the numbers for the rest, you're probably quite confident that they're over that hump and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? If you're like, I liked that. I was always the guy in the team like that didn't mind doing all the data engineering and all the kind of, I think like that's why I ended up being a head of MLE, right? I quite liked just doing the plumbing bits as well. But just know what you're getting in for, I think. If you land and there's nothing there, then I would petition for, if you're not ready to do it, I would petition whoever's hired you for the right support, or getting like a bit of help bringing the data sources at least into a clean spot. And then if you're an organization that's not sure what to do and you're making your first data hire, don't start with a data scientist. Like, I think you are probably always better with either like an analyst that wants to do a bit of everything, or a data engineer that wants to build you good foundations and like you can get usually a lot of value from automated reporting of stuff like long before machine learning, right? And again, there's like loads of use cases where that's not true, but I think it's easier to start with a good data engineer.
Yeah, good point. I kind of agree with you. I think many companies, they think, well, maybe they don't even know what they want or who they should hire. So they think, well, data scientist is a buzzword. I need a data scientist. Let's find one. And then they hire one and they realize that, oh, actually, that's maybe not what I needed.
Yeah. So I got chewed up about this recently, because I post some stuff that's like a bit provocative, right? To try and sort of feed the engagement gods. But so I talked about how for a lot of the places I've hired for and teams I've built, especially if you're like the early data scientist through the door, I'm actually like, you'll get a lot of applications. There's no shortage of people that want to be data scientists, right? That's a myth. So it's easy to find lots of people at a high standard, I think, as long as you're paying like at or above average rates and you're not working for like a scumbag industry, you'll find people that want to work with you, right? So then you can screen for whatever you like. And I think that actually having some of that, like skills in SQL, skills in a little bit of like performance profiling testing, like being able to do some of the more engineering-y stuff separates out the people that are probably going to succeed being that one-man band or one-person band, sorry, like in a setting where they're not going to have the right support. Um, yeah, whereas it's not really anyone's fault, and like so, and then I put this post up talking about that, and a lot of people were saying, "Well, why don't you hire two people for the two roles?" Then it's like, well, some of these companies don't have budget for two people; they've got budget for one person. I know it looks like a unicorn, but that like they're taking their first step on the journey, and they need to prove it's valuable before they can spend like £400,000 a year on a team of like four people or whatever. Um, yeah, it's hard, right?
Yeah, very difficult, especially if you're just starting, and especially if the company, well, if it's a tech company, probably the founders are, well, they have a CTO, or they have some knowledge and they know what they need to build their company. But if it's something completely unrelated, like energy or agriculture or something like that, it could be quite challenging.
The example I always use, right, is one of my old customers from a previous life was a bakery. I've talked about this loads recently,
Hmm.
and so they did 30 million a year in revenue selling bread.
Oh.
That was it. So they're just an old like family-run bakery, made really successful. They wanted to start doing data science, and they had budget for one hire. You can't tell you could like they're not a tech company. They never will be. There is value to be had because some predictive stuff might make a big difference to them. But telling them, oh, you need to get a data engineer and a machine learning engineer and a data scientist and a software engineer before you can start. Well, they won't bother. Um, and there's other routes to that. Obviously, you go down some of the managed service routes and things like that, or use consultancies. But I just think how like that is a situation where you've got to kind of start with a pragmatic, maybe not best of the best in everything, but someone that is a bit of a jack of all trades that can at least get them off the ground and prove, or even just tell them what they need. Like sometimes it takes someone being there 6 months to figure that out.
So there is value in today's society to be some kind of multi-skilled person that knows a bit of software engineering, a bit of data engineering, a bit of data science. You don't need to be like an expert in, I don't know, stats or machine learning models. You can have a bit of knowledge from data engineering, ML, stats, SQL, things like that, and be quite valuable as well.
I think so. So I think probably the most like sought after, the best jobs, right? You will need to be like pure specialist, like really highly specialized, but you'll be competing against other really highly specialized people, right? So if you like don't think you can get to be the very best in the field at this, like top 1%, like you're going to struggle to land the roles that you want because you're also limiting the kinds of organizations that can support you. Like that, like super genius maths wizard that knows a little bit of Python and that's it, like will not survive at the bakery, right? Because they
Hmm.
can't support them, and maybe they don't want to work there. That's fine, but they'll probably do better at Fang-like companies, right? Um, so it depends on where you are and what you want, and like what you find fun and what's interesting. I'd say for early career people, I would probably say like try and learn a bit of it all because at least you'll learn the stuff you don't like, and also like I strongly believe that knowing bits of software engineering, like I'm not a software engineer at all, right, but knowing bits of it and having tried to learn big chunks of it makes me better in teams with software engineers because I kind of understand what they're on about and why they care about like dependency injection and things like that, which like usually just goes over the heads of lots of data people, and why like CI/CD and testing and all this is important because it makes that team gel a bit better. Even if I'm never the one doing it, I understand it, right? So I think early career is always worthwhile, but if you want to get far, then specialism and industry context, I think probably are what you should then start optimizing for. So it's that whole thing about the T-shaped engineer, right?
Yeah, so let's summarize what we discussed because I went on a tangent, but I want to come back to your career. Basically, you did this PhD, you went to industry, you worked first you worked in a big company, then you moved to a startup, and at some point you actually moved to Incremental Group, where you start as a senior data scientist, but then you transition to becoming a manager. So first thing, for those who aren't familiar with Incremental Group, what's Incremental Group doing? And yeah, what are they doing and how do they use data and AI basically?
Yeah, so Incremental Group, one of the fastest growing, it was a startup, one of the fastest growing consultancies in the UK up until February this year. So founded in 2015 by three guys who were former Lockheed Martin, and they built essentially a consultancy delivering Microsoft Dynamics and like Azure services, right? Grew to I don't know. I think it was about 700 people by February this year. They sold in February, just gone, for 185 million. So, bit of a wild ride, and it was great fun being there. It was like one of the most dynamic and like high intensity places I've been, but it was really, really good. Some super talented folks, and yeah, like deserved all the lot they got. I thought, and all the success they got. So it was interesting. So I joined when their main service offering was Dynamics, right? Building ERP and CRM systems for organizations across the UK. And for people that aren't familiar with those, they're much like Salesforce and what's the other one? There's plenty of them, right? Where you buy a product platform and it needs lots of like integration and customization to fit your business, right? So that's what they did. And then I joined as data scientist number one. And by the end of my first 9 months there were three of us as data scientists there. And delivering projects for some interesting customers, and it was like customers that had maybe another thing off of us, like a Dynamicsy thing off us, and then we were doing some interesting data stuff for them as follow-ups, right? And then they restructured the business because they'd grown really quickly after about 9 months, and they wanted to go from one big like group of sort of consultants to 5 business units, and that's when I kind of made the transition, which was yeah mixed fun, I'd say.
So can you go through this transition? Yeah, how did it happen and why was it mixed fun as you said?
Yeah, so yeah, like I was very ambitious. Always had, and I said one of these people was kind of always had a plan, and I tell people this all the time. I think like if anyone ever asks you like what you want to do in 5 years or whatever, like tell them you want their job or tell you want their boss's job or something like that, because like people like ambitious people, and if you want to like progress, actually a lot of people want to help you out. Like people that are further on than you want to line up the opportunities for you to get what you want. Going into roles and like not and just being a bit like humble and meek and British about it, right? You just kind of, oh, I don't mind. Like you're not giving them the information to help make you successful and whatever, right? So I was ambitious, and they knew I wanted to progress and run my own consultancy one day. So when they split to 5 business units, they wanted to start a data and AI business unit and grow that as its own practice, separate from the dynamic stuff. And I'd worked really hard for them, and like it'd gone really well. And so they offered it to me, and yeah, that was interesting. So I literally overnight went from individual contributor leading teams to actually managing people and trying to grow the team. And I did some technical stuff still, but I spent a hell of a lot of my time doing like everything from like recruitment, performance management, like HR stuff, finances, sales, marketing, like all this stuff that you need to do to run a business. And it's quite a common pattern. You get business unit directors. That was my job title. And that is like, it was described to me as like you're like a mini CEO within the company. So you run your business unit, you're in charge of everything, you're responsible for everything, but you get support from the main company. Yeah, and that was really enlightening. And then, look, it was mixed fun because I was really bad at it at first, right? And I was a bad manager at first. I had like personal issues around my own attitude and the way like I was and I behaved, just inexperience and things like that, and alienated a few people as that team grew. So that team grew from three to quite a few in the end, and yeah, had really difficult times with some of it because I. Again, yeah, inexperience and whatever. But over time, I got better at it. I got better and better as time went on. Eventually, I got given a second team that was much bigger to try and help them. And yeah, it was interesting, an interesting kind of trial by fire. But I've got the scars to show for it, and yeah, there's stuff I've still got big regrets off the back of it. But I've learned a hell of a lot from doing it, and it's funny because there's plenty of leadership books out there, and there are some management books as well. There's not loads on like the transition, like the feeling. So I think if I ever get the time, that will be my memoirs. I'll write like
Mm.
the how it felt and like why it was so difficult to do. And I still find like I'm obsessed with it now, like learning about management and leadership and stuff, because I think it's one of those things that like not many people talk about being good at. It's kind of like you need to have managers, right? And that's that. But people don't often talk about, well, how do you be a good manager and what does management feel like in data and stuff like that. So that's what like all my blogs like about all that stuff, my newsletter. And yeah, I'm not sure if it's better than being an IC. I don't know. Like I do miss like spending all of my time like stuck into doing data science problems and stuff. But I've learned a load of different stuff. And my kind of gut feel was always that if you could become the best manager, right, like the absolute best leader, and everyone wanted to work for you, then and if I can take a team of great people and make them work together well, which is really hard, even if they're all excellent, um, then actually, as a group, we'll just outperform anything we could kind of do on our own. So that's kind of the value I add now, I hope.
So what kind of mistakes did you make when you started? And also follow up on this, how did you realize that you weren't a good manager, that you were making mistakes, and how did you improve on this?
Yeah, so I did a few things. I'm a workaholic, right? I was comfortably at the time. I was working 90-hour weeks quite a bit. Like that's just I loved my job. I loved what I was doing. Consultancy's hard, startups are hard, right? So like you add all that together and you get this quite intense environment. And so I kind of had that level of expectation for the people that work with me, and I hadn't spotted that like I'd progressed quickly to director, and I hadn't thought, well, that's because I was maybe exceptional in the amount I was giving to the company. So I just kind of expected other people to be at that level, and then having not really managed people before, like expectation setting was really difficult. Like, and I actually think like a lot of problems in the workplace from internally working with customers, like everything can almost boil down to a lack of understanding of the expectations by both sides. Like really explicitly now, like I think really explicitly, like almost writing little mini contracts on this is exactly what you said and what I meant, and this is what we'll do. Like that solves so many problems because a lot goes unsaid in the environment, like the work environment, stuff like that. So yeah, probably a mismatch of expectations and then when stuff was easy, it was great. And I did a lot of like, I gave away a lot of freedom to try and like make people like me because like I was like, I don't know, I want people to like me, so I gave away a lot of freedoms. And then when stuff wasn't so good, like when we came into like difficult patches, sales weren't in or projects were overrunning, I had no like levers and no control because I'd alienated people by not being great and being a bit too harsh, perhaps. But at the same time, like I'd given them so much freedom that there was no real precedent, and I didn't really have any controls over what was there. Um, yeah, expectations were all over the shop, and like my communication style wasn't perfect. So because I worked all hours, like and I'm a big believer in asynchronous communication. So I love like just writing messages and emails and sending them out. Da, da, da. Found out much later on that I had a reputation for management by email, and I didn't just do enough FaceTime with people, which is like you just don't until someone tells you that. You're like it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to know. Um, and I think a lot of it comes down to like trust. Like you can kind of take this back to nowadays. I think I really spend so much time trying to build, and we'll talk about friendships in a minute, but trying to build like strong personal relationships and understandings of people, and like having face to face time and doing stuff with and for them, so that when it's more difficult, like they understand that it's a human that's asking them,
Mm-hmm.
like, performance isn't great. Can we do something about it? How can we do it? Blah blah blah. And it's like you're together with them in it, as opposed to like just a manager, like a non-human manager that's just pushy and not great, and he's never there. And then the other thing is like that whole. I've got this thing about friendships now as well. Like I think I was trying to treat everyone like a friend first, and in hindsight, that I don't think that's right in a professional environment. I think you can be friends with your team and you can be friends with people, and that's great if you can. But you must first and foremost, like you are colleagues and you work together, and there's a professional like relationship that must be upheld at all times and stuff like that. And blurring that line too much can cause issues if you're not like you've not already built all that trust up, right? I mean, it cost me friendships, right? All this, so it was painful for
Mm-hmm.
me.
How did you manage to improve then and learn from those mistakes to become a good, better manager?
Yeah, great difficulty, I guess. Sort of lots of self-reflection, being told all this stuff like by observers. Um, I've got a really good mentor, so the CEO of that business like mentors me, and he's like very frank and blunt, and he'll like tell me that I'm rubbish at this and rubbish at that, and gives me things to work on. Therapy, like I've kind of to help look at parts of me that maybe don't fit what I do. Like I voraciously read as much as I can on leadership and management these days. Like I probably read probably a book a week, like through Audible or reading, and I'd say 90 to 95% of everything I read is like something about communication or management or leadership, because I'm looking for every kind of lever, every trick I can find to apply to like my world and what I'm doing, and then try and pass on the stuff that I think's worked for me and build little systems that might make it easier. Um, yeah, I'm a big like self-reflect now a lot, and then just changing what I did. So there was other managers in that company that were really good and had really good reputations. So just copy them. Like that's one of the best ways to get good at anything is just copy people that are good at it already. Just go like, what exactly are you doing, and just can I do exactly that? Try and be a lot less emotional as well. Like that was a big thing for me. Like I was hot-headed and emotional, and when stuff was great, I was really happy, and when stuff wasn't great, I was really grumpy. And you just have to get rid of all that. I think it's hard. Like it's a hard thing to do. It's almost like an act, but you have to actually be it as well.
Yeah, that's something I feel a lot. Like it's very difficult to be emotional, and when you do some good work, you would be very happy. But as soon as you make a mistake or you do something that's less good, you would just be very stressed, and it can influence downstream work. If you need to work on something else later, you won't be in a chilled, relaxed mindset, and one mistake can lead to other mistakes as well. So something important, but I guess easier said than done, is to try to forget the emotion and
Mhm.
just focus, well, have a plan and tackle tasks one by one with a clear plan without any emotions.
So one of the other directors in that company that I ended up working really closely with was a like a master of that, and he was like a Zen machine. He said to me once, he was like, you can never react. And someone had told him, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he basically said something along the lines of just never react to anything. When you get like a new win, say you win a new customer and it's like the biggest win you've ever done and it's amazing, acknowledge it, and you can be a bit positive and be like, right, that is good, great, but don't get like joyous and emotional about it. Just like just let that wash over you and let other people be happy. And then at the same time, when like a member of your team like harpoons a whole project or upsets a customer or whatever, again, acknowledge it, say, right, I'm disappointed, we need to fix this, but just try and be flat. And I was like, that's a bit weird. No, I don't know. But it really worked. Like he was loved by everyone and he was really good at his job. So try to be a bit more like that. And I find that hard, right? And that's why like I've done a lot of work to try and embody that, I guess.
So let's move on from Incremental Group to Origami. You became actually the head of machine learning engineering at Origami after that. Yeah, what's Origami and what was your role there as the head of ML engineering?
Yeah, so I absolutely love my job at Incremental. Like it was like my dream role. Everything was right, and I got tempted away by Origami because they just had a really cool mission. They are building an energy tech startup, right, to try and fix the challenge of like the data problem in the energy space in the UK. And the CEO, Peter Banks, is a great guy. He kind of spotted that as like years ago, like long before it was actually an issue, that as more renewables and stuff get into the system gets more volatile, and therefore there's a bigger need for data processing and prediction and stuff like that. And it's just trying to get in front of that and make that easy for companies and stuff. So I joined them because they just delivered a pilot to a huge energy company in Austria, I think it was, at the had been a success. Like, so they'd done like a small bit of prediction work that was really successful, and that company turned around and went, right, we now need to scale this from like one site to 12,000. And it was like, oh right, okay, this isn't just Jupyter notebooks and like running stuff on an airflow schedule anymore. This is like we need to build something proper. And it's kind of, I'd been studying that side of things because MLOps was still, that was like 2 years ago, that was still, it's still fairly new outside of like big tech organizations. It was like kind of and it still is a bit of an emerging field, right? So I'd done bits of it and had explored ways of doing it, and so that was that. Yeah, got brought in to do that, and ended up being um, did a lot of the kind of head of data stuff. It was like all things data kind of came to me because I'd had experience, had a really good team of data scientists and data engineers there, and yeah, built some cool stuff.
What's the problem of data and in the energy sector? You mentioned they wanted to
No,
fix this problem.
God, there's loads. So energies, and that's so my consultancy now is focused on the energy sector because it's so interesting and it's so the opportunity is massive, and actually like you can make some real impact to like the green initiative stuff and like carbon and things. So I really believe in it as a space, but also the technical challenge is like really interesting. So you've got, and I didn't know any of this before I worked at Origami, but in the UK at least, but most places, right, energy gets traded in 30-minute windows throughout the day. So there's 48 windows a day, and they trade energy, and then the system provider, like National Grid in our case, their job is to make sure that at all times supply and demand are balanced, right? Otherwise, you get problems. So back in the day, and this was kind of the genius for Origami, back in the day when you just had loads of gas power stations, well, it was quite easy to predict how much you were going to produce because it's just a function of how much gas you put in, right? So you could do your predictions quite easily, and they could be in Excel and nice and long-winded, and you could trade like weeks in advance, and that was kind of how it was done. But now that you've got loads of like wind and solar on the system, you can't make those predictions that far in advance anymore. Like if you don't know what your wind farm's going to produce, right? So you've got a financial domain to the data, like market data that ticks, and that is becoming more and more real time. And actually, there's lots of different markets you can sell into and services that you can sell your energy into that pay you differing amounts depending on what you do. So, like, there's a whole thing at the moment that's like one of the more profitable ways to make money. And the reason batteries, like huge batteries, are becoming really popular in the energy sector is frequency response services. So you get paid. You can get paid to have a battery that isn't charged, sat on a grid, and
Mm-hmm.
it enters a frequency response service. And if too much power is generated in a window, your battery can suck that up to keep everything balanced. And then actually in the next window, you could enter the opposite service that if not enough is produced, you can dump it. So you just get paid to charge and paid to discharge. But so there's like one model, right? So there's all these different, and like, is that more profitable than just selling that energy wholesale, so on and so forth? So you've got a financial element to it. You've got the physical element to it of like, this is actual physical like kit out in a field, like generating
Mm-hmm.
electricity. You've got like predictive maintenance. You've got temperature, like all these different factors going on. You've got weather to think about, and actually there's like a contractual element as well. There's like another domain which is like, have I signed contracts called power purchase agreements, PPAs, that determine what price I get for my energy into what
Mm-hmm.
markets and whatever. Like, have I actually already sold half this portfolio to another company that are going to sell it on, and so on and so forth. So that is, and another thing about the physical data tends to be like super high frequency, not super high frequency, but like that would be like 20 hertz, right? Because it's just like IoT data coming in from loads of different sources. And then the market data is like half hourly from one source. And you're trying to like build models using all of it and mix it all together. So it's just a big mess of data basically that you've got to try and make sense of.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of this because actually my master thesis back when I was at uni was on predicting the energy of solar panels
Okay.
across the UK. So a slight part of this because I just had, yeah, energy data from different solar stations in the UK, and just had to also use satellite images and
Very
things like
cool.
that and the cloud to try to predict energy. And yeah, it's actually quite challenging. Predicting solar power isn't easy because yeah, you need to basically, well, if you've got a cloud that comes just on top of your solar panels, that's, yeah, basically no energy anymore, so, or
Yeah.
very little, so you kind of need to predict that, but this means you need to predict weather, so it
Which is
becomes,
really
yeah,
hard, right?
quite. Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So what was Origami? Was it more some kind of consultancy, or were they trying to solve different challenges within the energy sector?
No, so Origami is a SaaS platform, and the idea is they have a mix of, so they have like IoT device type things like called energy routers that they will go out and install on your batteries and your kit in the field, and that collects the data from the device and sends it to Origami's cloud. But it also allows them to send instructions to the device, which means, and you have to go through all these licenses and things with the grid to prove that you're going to play by the rules of all the services you get into, right? So that they'll do all that for you. So like you can just buy a great big battery, stick it in a field, and turn Origami on, and it will do most of the control for you. But they're essentially building a SaaS platform that just gets rid of the common stuff. Like everyone needs to get their data into a format and make decisions on it and look at the performance of what they've done and like look at their financial performance of their trades and bid into markets, get access to the market data. That's like common. So why should every energy company do it? And the interesting thing about, there's other companies that do this as well, but Origami have taken a position of not doing any trading. So they don't bid. A lot of the other providers of these kinds of services also have like a trading house as well. So Origami's position is they're just a tech layer, which means they're never going to compete with their customers, right? So their customers are energy companies and trading firms and like people that just own batteries and stuff. Um, and then it's a SaaS platform, so it's like iterating that platform and building more and more features that make it more useful for people.
So essentially building a tool that enables other energy company to, well, get more data, play around with their data and make better trades as well in the end.
Yeah,
Cool. And then so why did you leave from there to start your company then?
yeah. Always wanted to. Like I've ever since day one at Incremental, I wanted to start something, and I did strongly believe. at the time, the reason I went into a consultancy job because I kind of thought that that was a really good model for data science, especially in these smaller companies like that aren't mature. Like, because I'd had a couple of jobs where I'd landed, there was maybe like 6 months worth of a project to do, delivered it, and then there was nothing left. And it was like, right, now that's what we wanted to do. So you end up doing like BI work or database work, which is fun, but you're like an expensive, not very good DBA, right? That's which isn't really what you signed up for. So, and I'd seen that, and I'd heard friends that got into the industry as well, like have the same experience over and over and over again. And I thought, well, maybe consultancy is better actually. Come in, do the project, and then just walk away. Let the customer deal with it and enjoy it, and like figure out how it fits their model, and then maybe either come back or build a team around what you delivered. So I always knew I wanted to do it. Yeah, left origami because the time was right. Really, it just kind of things had lined up. I delivered some of the stuff I wanted to do, and it was a nice natural break. To come and do it. And I'd learned so much about the energy industry. I was kind of fascinated, like, all right, I want to do this for lots of companies across the sector. And here we are.
So is that right to say that you're doing energy consultancy and you're providing services in, well, focused on data science, data strategy, and building data teams? Am I missing something else?
No, spot on. Yeah, like my absolute bullseye customer is someone trading energy in the UK markets that wants to have a look at their data platform or their architecture, their strategy, or their data science or whatever, and I can either advise in or bring in my consultants and we can do the project with you or for you or whatever. But like we're very young, so as much as they're the target customer, like I'll take what I get. And if someone comes along from like a manufacturing thing in the States, then I'm not going to turn them down, right? So, but yeah, dream customers are in and around the energy space, trying to do stuff there really.
Can you zoom maybe into one example of one the way data science can help one particular business, like just a particular example of some client or even a project that you've got in mind?
Yeah, so okay, one customer are like they own power stations, right? And they trade power, but they're like traditional traders, and they do some data analysis, but it's more like fundamental analysis. It's like long-term curves of like what's going to happen in the market, how a price is going to change over the winter, that kind of stuff. And then they're on the desk, like loads of screens around them, 24 hours a day, making trades, selling, right? And that is data informed, but there's a lot of opportunity there to go, right, well, why don't we build a killer prediction model for this market? And actually, like, they're doing things around, not with me, but they're doing things around how, like, they can install loads of IoT type sensor systems into the actual plants to look at like predictive maintenance and all that stuff again. But so yeah, look, like everyone wants better forecasting, crystal ball, so they know what the price is going to be before everyone else, so they get an edge when they trade and stuff like that. But there's also just like general data architecture and strategy stuff. Like there's big wins to be had where these, like most companies, they grow organically over like 20 years. They end up with like 5 or 6 different software platforms that support the different functions. And then, so there's one function produces loads of data, and simple things like there's too much data for them to stick it on the network. It's like 200 gig a day they produce, right? So it just gets binned because they're not data people. They use it and they've done the analysis and they send the results off. But another function could really make use of that actually, if they could just look at it. And so like, okay, well, can we build the architecture and the kind of landing zones where that all gets tidied up and archived off and improve the auditability and stuff like that, or all that kind of stuff? Can we build you better Power BI reports? Can we build you like better alerts and things like that enable you to just derive more value from the data that you're already generating and use it and collecting?
So yeah, this looks like a great use case of like where you can apply data science. Another thing that you're doing is like data strategy. How is that? How do you differ data strategy from data science? What would be a data strategy
So for me,
example?
definitions are hard, right? So I always think data science is trying to find value in data that you've got, like trying to derive value and understanding from the data you have, right? Whereas a data strategy is like what your organization as a whole is going to do with the data that, or like, and how you're going to treat data and how you're going to manage it. And it's strategy is a really fluffy word that gets thrown about. And if you've never worked in like strategy consulting, like I didn't really know what it meant. It was just a thing that consultants said, right? But essentially, like your business should have a business strategy, and that is like, okay, what are we going to do in the next 5 years, and why, essentially. And then under the business strategy, I always think there should be like a technology strategy, which is like, okay, how are the how's the data and the apps that we use going to support that? And then I think that in a lot of cases the data strategy sits under the tech strategy, and so it was put to me a really good way, and I wrote a post on this, like the framework I've used to do it quickly, because like this can be as big or as small as you want it to be, and a lot of people get like try and do these huge frameworks, whereas I like a bias for action. Let's get going and then iterate it. But I always think a strategy should answer four questions essentially: where are we now? Like, what's the current state of play? Like all of our systems, all of our challenges, blah blah blah. Blah. Where are we? Where do we want to go? Like, what do we want to do? What things do we want to achieve with our data? Okay, like how are we going to get there? What's the plan to get from point A to point B? Like all the little initiatives and projects that we have to do to bridge that gap. And then where do we start? So like of all those initiatives, which ones naturally line up, and which ones can we do with our current skills? Which ones can we do we need to hire in for? And then I think you can. So I like those four questions, and then I talk about like you've got the elements that you have to consider and the enablers, so or concerns and enablers. So like your concerns are like you need to be concerned about governance, you need to be concerned about the tools, you need to be concerned about the skills, and then your enablers are like right, yeah, the people and the technologies that you're going to use to answer those concerns, right? And that's roughly a 30-second kind of rundown of how I do
Mm.
data strategy. Obviously, it goes a bit deeper than that.
No, that was super clear because yeah, it's not a topic that I'm super familiar with. So that was super clear and actually quite
Yeah, I think half the
interesting.
game actually is putting together something that I say this a lot, but like you want, especially if you're a consultant, you want people to feel like you're doing it with them and not to them, like they're on board. So I think half the game is like producing something that all the relevant stakeholders in the company have had a look at and gone, yeah, we're doing that. Because once you get people lined up, stuff starts to really go. The I think when you've got like pockets of development going on, and like the finance team want to do one thing with their data and the HR team want to do something completely unrelated, and there's only like three developers, like it gets difficult. But if everyone had a chance to input and talk about the prioritization and get lined up, and you understand why stuff, and actually like you're not doing pet projects, you're doing stuff because you've lined it up with the business strategy, so it all sort of feeds up the pyramid, then it arms people with like something to go into big meetings and say, well, no, we're not going to do that because we all said we were going to do this instead, and here's why I think we do need the budget for this, and we should cut that, and that's where it helps, I think.
So is planning and communication key to drive a good data strategy?
Yeah, I think so, and I think like again, I see them as living documents. Like, actually, I think it should be someone in the organization's job, like on their yearly appraisal, to like keep up to date the data strategy and keep iterating it and keep because everything changes all the time, right? Like you could write a really good data strategy and then COVID happens and you're going to have to change your data strategy, right? Because your business is probably going to completely change overnight, right? So I just think it should be someone's job to keep that ticking over. But it's hard because like most people don't even know what it is, let alone how to do one that's kind of worthwhile. And then you get mixed up in like, okay, you look at maybe the big consultancies and how they do it. Maybe they're out of your budget. Are you stuck? But yeah, I think like communication is kind of the key to all of it, actually.
In 2022, how important is this to have a data strategy if you're a company?
Um, I think probably not what people expect, but I think you can be successful without one, right? But especially as you grow, I think you're more likely to be successful with one, right? So like I've seen lots of very successful companies that have never thought about this stuff at all and it just works, yeah. But at the same time, getting groups of people to agree is really difficult and humans haven't cracked that one yet. So the strategy, I almost see it as like a framework to kind of get some agreement and try and drive stuff. So I think it becomes important when you've either plateaued and you're like stuff's not really going any further, or there's lots of infighting or just struggles and difficulties and stuff.
So beyond data strategy, the third thing in your business is also building data teams. I'm just wondering, like, what do you need to build a strong data team? I guess it will depend on the business, but roughly, what's your view on that? And what do you need to have a team? Is it just one person, or I guess a team is, well, you can be a team of one person,
Yeah, I
but you
think you
can
can.
also.
I think the best teams have the tools and the skills that they need to solve problems like autonomously, so they're not like dependent on lots of other people all the time to do stuff for them, and then have the understanding of like what they need to do and why they need to do it. Um, I think those two things often get missed, and like you can have really capable teams that know what to do and then don't have the permissions or the skills or the tools, or you have really capable people that don't have a deep understanding of like the why. Like, why has such and such a person from finance asked me to do this because he's already got this report somewhere else, and it's
Mhm.
trying to figure that out. What those skills are and that understanding is very, very context specific. So that's kind of it. There's that's hard. I think you always need, there's like four kind of, I talk about four like personality types, I guess, or like roles that you have to play, and one person can do them all, but you need a communicator, someone that's happy to like listen to people and communicate, sort of translate between the techies and the business people. You need a builder, someone that likes to build things and get all the nuts and bolts tight and like obsess over the kind of actually doing bit. You need an explorer, someone that's happy to like get stuck in the problem and get a bit lost in the weeds and like bring the innovation type stuff or connect the dots. And then you need like what I call the conductor. It's a terrible name, but I've kind of run out of good names for these. But someone that's happy to like track what's in flight, what you promised you were going to do, like when you said you were going to do it, why, and all that. Like do the project management stuff, like the stakeholder
Mhm.
management and things. And I think one person can do all of those, but I try and make sure that at least those four are covered within a team. And if you find that there's a weakness, actually bringing in external stakeholders and just putting them in the team as well on a part-time basis can be all it takes. Like the best communicator translator from me to finance is a person from finance, right, that sits in the team with me and helps me because, do you know what I mean, they're already playing for the other side. So,
If you had to choose one skill, what would it be? You
ah,
mentioned four.
of those four, communication, always, always, always. I think if you're a really, really good communicator, you're really good at listening to people, you can do wonders. That's like I convinced that most business problems end up being communication problems.
Well, unexpected. I wouldn't expect this one skill for data scientists. That's You think that's more important than the technical aspect or the data aspect?
Definitely, because if I'm really good, I can convince the person with the technical know-how to do the work for me, right? Or I can convince my boss to go out and hire the right people to do that stuff. The There's a lot of talent that gets like burnt out or frustrated by not having the right support and the right stuff put in place. And a good communicator will understand that, will like listen to the frustrations and listen to the needs and make the case to go and get it and bring people on the journey with them, I think.
Well, very good point. I just want to ask two questions based on your career before we finish the episodes. The First one is when did you do your PhD? How long ago was this?
2012 to 16 in Strathclyde. I graduated from at Tales in Glasgow, Govan.
So if you could tell something to yourself 10 years ago, one advice or one, I don't know, recommendation, what would you tell yourself?
Genuinely, I'd definitely tell myself to start writing up earlier than I did. But in all seriousness, start writing online earlier. Like, genuinely think one of the biggest, and this ties back into the communication thing, right? I think one of the best skills I've covered, like kind of developed over the last couple of years, is my writing online and just putting my thoughts out there. I've learned a lot from sharing stuff that I thought I was teaching, like giving my opinion and people challenge it and like have a go at me and all that. I learn a lot from that and I've become a lot better for it. And I've made great connections with great people. So I think start writing as early as possible. You do not have to be the expert. You can write about what you are learning as you are learning it and people will find it valuable.
What do you mean about writing? Would it be blog post? Would it be writing on social media? Any kind of writing?
Anything, get in the habit once a week. I do a long form piece once a week. And I write twice a day on LinkedIn now, and I write on Twitter, because it's been so impactful for my development that I just do loads of it, and I'm practicing and honing like stories and arguments over and over and over again, so that when they come up in like a real situation, they just fly off the tongue, and I know that I can say that in a way that people understand because I've done it before and it's resonated before. It's such a useful thing to do, and the downside's so little. It's not a waste of time, honestly.
What does this bring you? Like so many positive things. What kind of
Oh
positive
wow,
things?
right. Money, like actual cash money. If you want to just get paid really quickly, start writing on Medium. If you get half decent and can get into like a big publication, then you can make like hundreds of dollars a month from just writing once a week. Um, that's a good benefit. I think the biggest benefit for me is that learning piece and meeting people. Like there are world experts that I talk to on LinkedIn where I've kind of write the most that I'd never ever meet. And I had a customer recently had a weird data problem, and I was like, oh, going to suggest a thing that I wasn't that convinced about. So I just called up a guy, Joe Reese, who's just written the book Fundamentals of Data Engineering. I just called him up, and he was like, "Yeah, hi, how to meet you?" Because we talk a lot. He gave me loads of free advice. I took that back to the customer. They were chuffed to bits. I would not have been able to do that if I didn't write online. So that's like the bigger benefit. Um, but yeah, money's nice as well. And then actually, like writing my business, I get if you're interested in getting job offers because I've grown a following. People bomb you with like, "Oh, please come and work for this company, that company," which is nice. But as a business owner, like all of my work at the moment's inbound. Like all I get customers come to me, like not billions, but I get enough to keep me more than busy, right? So plenty of benefits, I would say.
So money, learning, plus you build a network and get lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's finish with one advice. If you just had one advice for someone to progress in their career, what would it be? Just one advice.
Um, Probably really think about where you want to get to and then let people know, like either through your writing or just speaking directly to someone, like mentoring is another form of communication, right? Just be explicit and clear about what you want to achieve and let people help you. Like if you don't tell anyone, they won't, or they won't know that they could. Like people are really, it's such a good community. People are desperate to just be kind and help. So give them the opportunity to by just being open and honest and trying to help. And honestly, you'll go much faster.
Well, thanks so much, Adam. I had a lot of fun and learned a lot from you. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining the AI Stories podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a great evening and yeah, let's catch up soon.
Ace, thank you very much. See ya.